Are there some governments that are more willing to take action than others?
Absolutely. I mean, the United States has been like a wonderful partner to our foreign countries, right? And we're in a very unique position. Most of the money that leaves corrupt countries leaves in US dollars. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons China and Russia are trying so hard now to get around that and literally hoard US dollars so that they can clear transactions without hitting the US financial correspondent banking situation, which gives me venue to go after those assets.
Mm-hmm.
So the US has, recovered billions of dollars from Malaysia, Nigeria, all these other countries. But in euro, like if the money moved in euros, I have no venue. So then you have to, but France did a wonderful job on the Obiang case. Germany, Canada, there's some, the UK has seized assets. The UK just enabled a unexplained wealth orders. And so if you're somebody living in their country and you have millions of, like 100 million unexplained wealth, they could possibly seize it unless you can show that, no, it's not unexplained. Here, let me explain it to you. But, it's hard to show that on a general salary of maybe $60,000 a year in another country, you amassed $100 million fortune.
Yeah. Could you help me to explain? So the kleptocracy, it seems like obviously it's benefiting the people who are at the top who can throw the levers. Can you help me draw the breadcrumb trail into how that actually is destabilizing the country and the violence and problems that can come from that inside of those countries as well? Because I have a feeling people listen, it's like, well, okay, like, yeah, there's some people at the top who are becoming exceptionally wealthy. I want to make sure that people also understand what that means for the citizens of those countries and what that level of corruption does to their daily life as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ukraine is a perfect example of that. Remember, I said that Yanukovych took up to $40 billion out of the economy, Poroshenko another $5 billion. So when I arrived in 2014, the soldiers had limited bullets for their guns, and they're lining up on the eastern border and being invaded by Russia. So, I mean, under Yanukovych, he severely weakened the military purposefully so that Putin could annex Crimea and invade. And then you had 5 more years of that under Poroshenko. And so you've got Zelensky now who's doing a good job, and he didn't flee. He's stuck in place and is fighting for his country, but he's got a severely weakened military. South Sudan, which is where I work, is another example. 90% of their money comes from oil revenue, but they keep borrowing money and it's stolen. So they have already pre-sold the oil that's coming out of the ground until at least 2027. I mean, so no money is going to what money does go to is to the military and like the security service that supposedly has 10,000 strong soldiers for security service. I mean, like their CIA, their Secret Service. But basically it's a, private police force for the president. And they've been accused of war crimes and atrocities. And that's why South Sudan was deemed the most corrupt country in the world. You have 4 million people out of 11 million that are displaced in other countries, like in Uganda and in Congo and in border countries. You have 2 million displaced within the country, people that can't go home, and nothing's being made, right? Because you can't tend your fields. Your cattle get raided, and cattle is wealth there. Your cattle gets raided, gets stolen. But if you're wealthy, you will go in with armed cattle herders and displace the people that live there so that your cattle can now graze on their lands. And so, I mean, it just disrupts the entire community. But South Sudan has been in turmoil since at least when they fought for independence in 2011. And that's an example. But when there is no free media, when there is no rule of law, when there are no prosecutions for corruption, when your phone is being tapped by the police, when you can be detained without ever being charged. I used to feel comfortable when I traveled to Nairobi. And then in 2017, 2 anti-corruption activists got picked up off the streets of Nairobi and within hours were secreted onto an aircraft and taken to the Blue House in Juba, which is where their security service there tortures and interrogates people. And then they were murdered and thrown in the Nile. And for the next year and a half, no one knew they were dead. Amnesty International, other groups were fighting for their release. They were dead. They were thrown in the Nile. Their families didn't know if they were dead or alive. And so, like, now, do I feel comfortable in Nairobi? No. And so so much of the problems around the world can all be linked back to corruption.
Well, it seems like too, if you're living in that environment that you're describing, you're spending 0% of your time, energy, and effort looking upwards at corruption because you're just trying to survive or leave the country. So that connects the dots for me on how these people are able to steal so much money.
Oh,
I mean, what a better way to steal in plain sight than distracting your people with just literally trying to survive or flee the country that they're in.
Again, not getting political, but look who's coming across our southern border. And you look at the triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Belize. I mean, the corruption is so great that people feel they have no opportunity. Mubarak, when in Egypt, I mean, Arab Spring happened because young men in that country had no opportunity. And
so we just, $100 billion to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Leaving off the table the discussion people have, should we do that? Should we reinvest it back in our own country? How do we make sure that a portion of that $100 billion, it doesn't go down the same path that previous leaders in Ukraine or, anywhere in the world? When the U.S., I don't think a lot of people realize that the U.S. provides more aid globally than any other country on the face of the earth. How do we make sure that it's not absconded with by these people, these dictators that are in power?
Well, it's interesting because I will tell you, when the U.S. returns money that the FBI has seized or DOJ has seized, we say, look, we want to return your money, but we can't continue to help you if it disappears again. I mean, then it's not worth the effort of the United States to continue to help our foreign partners if we return hundreds of millions of dollars only to have it disappear again. So I know with Nigeria, the U.S. State Department sat down with President Buhari and his Ministry of Justice and said, tell us what you want. Like, what do you want this money to do in your country? And he goes, I want 3 infrastructure projects. So an agreement was made where the money that we were returning went specifically to 3 projects that civil society and NGOs had to have full transparency to know how every dollar was spent, that the companies that would be subcontractors were vetted so that it wasn't, the president's nephew that had this company. And so steps can be taken. And frequently, like, I've always recommended to the State Department that they have a menu. Like, really, it's like, oh, is child infant mortality your problem? Okay, well, Doctors Without Borders will work in your country. We will give the money directly to Doctors Without Borders. It can only be spent in your country, and it's got to address your 3, whether it's Ebola, whether it's infant mortality, whether it's COVID. But we know we've given it for the benefit of your people to an organization that you say is a priority in your country. And so there are ways to safeguard. A lot of the aid that we're giving will be given in the form of food, so it's not like a check. And but yeah, I mean, I've seen aid all over the country, all over the world, where the rice comes in these giant bags, and the first truck that pulls up belongs to a general, and he's loading, the aid rice into the back to feed his group first. And I've talked to aid groups that say, yeah, we know 60% of it's going to walk, but 40% gets through. And I'm like, and you're happy with that ratio? And but they're not armed. Feed the Children isn't armed. UNICEF isn't armed. So that's an unhappy truth.